Welcome to God's Message Global. Before we begin, I want you to do something unusual. For the next few minutes, forget the noise around you. Forget the notifications, the deadlines, the worries that have been living rent-free in your mind, and ask yourself one question. What if the answer you've been searching for is already reaching out to you? What if the reason you clicked on this video wasn't an accident? Because sometimes, when life becomes too heavy, when your heart grows tired from carrying burdens no one else can see, God doesn't send a miracle first. He sends a message that arrives at exactly the right moment. Maybe you've been feeling alone lately, surrounded by people yet somehow isolated, smiling on the outside while fighting silent battles within. Maybe you've been praying for direction, for clarity, for a sign that you're not forgotten. And if that's you, then listen carefully, because this message may be exactly what your soul needs today. There was once a man named Daniel, not a famous man, not wealthy, not powerful, just an ordinary person trying to survive the storms of life. For years, Daniel had worked hard. He gave everything he had to his career, his family, and his dreams. He believed that if he stayed faithful and worked diligently, life would eventually reward him. But life didn't unfold the way he expected. One difficult season turned into another. His business failed. His savings disappeared. Friends he trusted slowly drifted away. The people who once applauded his success became silent during his struggles. Every morning felt heavier than the last. Every night brought new worries. And eventually, Daniel began asking the same question many people ask when life becomes painful. God, where are you? He didn't stop believing, but he started wondering why heaven seemed so quiet, wondering why his prayers felt unanswered, wondering if God had forgotten his name. One evening, after another exhausting day, Daniel sat alone on a park bench as the sun disappeared behind the horizon. The world around him seemed calm, but inside he felt broken. He lowered his head and whispered a prayer. Not a long prayer, not a perfect prayer, just a few honest words. God, if you're still with me, please help me. Then something unexpected happened. An elderly man walking through the park stopped near the bench. Daniel had never seen him before. The man smiled gently and sat beside him. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Then the stranger said something Daniel would never forget. Sometimes the darkest chapter of your life becomes the beginning of your greatest story. Daniel looked at him, surprised. The stranger continued, Most people think God has abandoned them when things fall apart, but often God is removing things that can no longer carry them into their future. Those words struck Daniel's heart, not because they solved his problems, not because they changed his circumstances overnight, but because they awakened something inside him, hope. For the first time in months, he felt a small spark of peace. The stranger stood up. Before leaving, he turned back and said, Don't measure God's presence by your current situation, measure it by his promises. And then he walked away. Daniel watched him disappear into the distance. What happened next was strange. The problems didn't vanish. The bills were still there. The uncertainty remained. But Daniel himself began to change. Instead of focusing on what he had lost, he started focusing on what remained. Instead of asking why everything was happening to him, he began asking what God was teaching him through it. Day by day, his perspective shifted, and with every small step forward, his faith grew stronger. Because sometimes God's greatest work doesn't happen around you, it happens within you. The truth is, many people are waiting for God to change their circumstances while God is preparing to change their hearts. And that preparation is never wasted. Think about a seed buried deep underground. From the outside, it looks forgotten, invisible, alone. But beneath the surface, something powerful is taking place. Roots are growing, strength is developing, life is forming, and when the right season arrives, what was hidden begins to rise. Maybe that's where you are today. Maybe you feel buried by disappointment, buried by fear, buried by unanswered questions. But what if you're not buried? What if you're planted? What if God is growing something in your life that you cannot see yet? And what if this season isn't the end of your story? What if it's only the beginning? Take a moment and let that sink in. Because no matter how difficult your current chapter may feel, God still sees you. He still hears every prayer. He still knows every tear. And He has not forgotten your name. The message today is simple. Don't give up. Not now. Not when your breakthrough may be closer than you think. Not when God may be working behind the scenes in ways you cannot yet understand. Hold on to faith. Hold on to hope. And remember this. The same God who guided you yesterday is already waiting for you in tomorrow.
Daniel couldn't stop thinking about the stranger's words. For weeks, those sentences echoed in his mind. Don't measure God's presence by your current situation. Measure it by His promises. At first, he wanted to believe it, but every morning, reality seemed determined to challenge his faith. The bills kept arriving, job applications were ignored, his bank account continued shrinking, and the future looked more uncertain than ever. One rainy afternoon, Daniel sat at his kitchen table staring at a stack of unpaid notices. The room was silent except for the sound of rain tapping against the window. He rubbed his tired eyes and whispered, "God, I've tried to stay strong. I've tried to trust you, but how much longer?" No answer came, only silence. The kind of silence that tests everything you believe. And that's where many people give up. Not when life becomes difficult, but when heaven becomes quiet. Because it's easy to trust God when prayers are answered immediately. It's easy to have faith when doors are opening. It's easy to believe when blessings are visible. But real faith is born in the moments when you see nothing at all. Daniel didn't know it yet, but his greatest test was about to become the foundation of his greatest blessing. A few days later, he received a phone call. His heart raced as he answered. Maybe this was the opportunity he'd been praying for. Maybe this was finally the breakthrough. But it wasn't. The company informed him that they had chosen another candidate, another rejection, another closed door. After hanging up, Daniel felt something inside him break. He walked outside and wandered through the city streets for hours. Questions flooded his mind. Why were every door closing? Why did every opportunity disappear? Why did it seem like everyone else was moving forward while he remained stuck? As the sun began to set, Daniel found himself standing in front of an old church. He hadn't planned to go there, yet somehow his feet had brought him there. The doors were open. Inside, only a few people sat quietly in prayer. Daniel slipped into the back row and sat down, his eyes fixed on a simple wooden cross. And for the first time in months, he stopped asking God for solutions. Instead, he simply sat in His presence. Minutes passed. Then something unexpected happened. A thought entered his heart. Not a voice, not a vision, just a quiet realization. What if the closed doors were protection? Daniel sat still. The thought wouldn't leave. What if the opportunities he lost weren't meant to destroy him? What if they were meant to redirect him? Suddenly, he remembered moments from his past, jobs he desperately wanted, but later discovered would have made him miserable, relationships he fought to keep, but later realized were unhealthy, plans that failed only to make room for something better. And for the first time, he considered a possibility he had never fully embraced. Maybe God's no wasn't rejection. Maybe it was guidance. Maybe every closed door was leading him somewhere he couldn't see yet. That night, Daniel returned home with a different perspective. His circumstances hadn't changed, but his understanding had. And sometimes that's where transformation begins. The next morning, instead of focusing on what he lacked, he started focusing on what he could do. He improved his skills, he organized his goals, he developed routines that strengthened both his mind and spirit. Day after day, he continued moving forward, not because he suddenly felt confident, but because he chose faith over fear. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, something extraordinary was happening. A company in another city was expanding. A position was opening. A position that perfectly matched Daniel's experience. A position that didn't even exist when he began praying months earlier. But Daniel knew nothing about it. He couldn't see what God was preparing, and that's the difficult part of faith. You rarely see the whole picture while you're living through it. You only see the pieces, the delays, the disappointments, the detours, but God sees the completed story. He sees the destination while you're still walking through the valley. Many people believe that delays mean denial, but what if some delays are actually preparation? What if God is strengthening your character before releasing your blessing? What if He's teaching you patience before entrusting you with responsibility? What if He's building the person you'll need to become before opening the door you're praying for? Daniel didn't realize it yet, but every struggle had been preparing him. Every setback had been teaching him. Every disappointment had been shaping him. And soon he would discover something powerful. The season he thought was destroying him was actually developing him. So, if you're listening right now and you're tired of waiting, if you're wondering why life isn't moving as quickly as you hoped, remember this: a delayed blessing is not always a denied blessing. Sometimes God is working in places you cannot see. Sometimes He's arranging circumstances beyond your understanding. And sometimes the answer is already on its way, long before you realize it. The challenge is trusting Him while the miracle is still invisible. Because faith isn't believing after you see the evidence. Faith is believing before the evidence arrives. And somewhere beyond Daniel's sight, beyond his understanding, beyond his expectations, a door was beginning to open. A door that would change everything.
Weeks passed. Then one morning, Daniel received an email. At first, he almost ignored it. After months of rejection, disappointment had become familiar. Hope felt dangerous, but something urged him to open it. The message was from a company he had never contacted. They had come across his profile through a professional connection and wanted to schedule an interview. Daniel read the email 3 times. His heart pounded. Could this be the opportunity he had been waiting for? Or was it another door that would eventually close? Part of him wanted to get excited. Another part was afraid of hoping again. Because when you've been disappointed enough times, even good news can feel suspicious. Still, he accepted the interview. Over the next few days, he prepared carefully. But something was different this time. Months earlier, Daniel would have approached the opportunity with desperation. Now he approached it with peace. He still wanted the job. He still needed a breakthrough. But he no longer believed his future depended entirely on one outcome. Somewhere along the journey, his faith had matured. He had learned something many people spend years trying to understand. God is not only present in the blessing, He is present in the waiting. The day of the interview arrived. Daniel sat across from the hiring manager, answering questions with honesty and confidence. The conversation flowed naturally. For the first time in a long time, he felt like himself again. Not the exhausted version shaped by fear, not the defeated version shaped by failure. The version of himself that believed possibilities still existed. When the interview ended, the manager smiled. "We'll be in touch soon." Those words sounded familiar. He had heard them many times before, so he thanked them politely and left. Then he did something unexpected. He stopped obsessing. He stopped refreshing his inbox every 5 minutes. He stopped imagining worst-case scenarios. Instead, he focused on living faithfully one day at a time, because he had finally learned that peace comes when you release what you cannot control. Days passed, then a week, then another. No response. Slowly, old fears began creeping back. Maybe this was another rejection. Maybe he had imagined the opportunity. Maybe nothing was changing after all. One evening, while sitting alone at home, Daniel found himself looking through old photographs, pictures from years earlier, pictures of dreams he once had, goals he once pursued, people who had once been part of his life. As he turned each page, he noticed something surprising. Many of the moments that seemed painful back then had later become blessings. The heartbreak that pushed him toward personal growth, the failure that forced him to develop new skills, the unexpected detour that introduced him to meaningful opportunities. Again and again, he saw the same pattern. God's hand had been present even when he couldn't recognize it. And suddenly, Daniel realized something powerful. Looking backward, he could clearly see God's faithfulness. So why was it so difficult to trust him moving forward? That realization changed everything. For the first time, Daniel thanked God not only for the blessings he understood, but also for the circumstances he didn't understand yet. Not because he enjoyed the struggle, but because he trusted the one guiding him through it. 3 days later, his phone rang. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. Daniel answered. The voice on the other end introduced herself. It was the company. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Daniel listened carefully. Then came the words he had prayed to hear for months. "We'd like to offer you the position." His eyes filled with tears, not because of the job itself, but because of everything the journey represented. The waiting, the uncertainty, the lessons, the growth, the moments when he nearly gave up, the moments when God remained faithful despite his doubts. As the conversation ended, Daniel sat quietly in his chair. He didn't celebrate immediately. He didn't jump up and shout. Instead, he simply bowed his head and whispered, "Thank you." But what Daniel didn't know was that an even deeper lesson was waiting for him, because the greatest blessing wasn't the job. The greatest blessing was who he had become during the process. The old Daniel would have measured success by circumstances. The new Daniel measured success by faith. The old Daniel needed visible proof before trusting God. The new Daniel trusted God before seeing proof. And that transformation would soon be tested in a way he'd never expected. Because life wasn't finished teaching him, and sometimes just after one prayer is answered, another challenge appears, not to break your faith, but to reveal how much it has grown. What happened next would show Daniel that God's plans often extend far beyond the blessing we think we're asking for. And the story was far from over.
The new job changed Daniel's life. It provided stability. It restored confidence. It opened opportunities he hadn't seen in years. Friends and family celebrated with him. People who knew his story called it a miracle, and in many ways it was. But several months later, Daniel discovered something unexpected. The blessing he had prayed for was never the final destination. It was only the beginning. One afternoon during a company meeting, Daniel was asked to mentor several new employees. At first, he wasn't sure why management had chosen him. There were people with more experience, people with better credentials, people who seemed far more qualified. Yet somehow they believed he was the right person for the role. As weeks passed, Daniel began working closely with the new team members. He listened to their concerns. He encouraged them through setbacks. He helped them navigate challenges. And gradually, something remarkable happened. He started hearing pieces of his own story in theirs. One employee was struggling financially. Another was battling self-doubt. Another felt stuck and uncertain about the future. And every time Daniel shared what he had learned during his difficult season, he saw hope return to their eyes, the same hope that had once been given to him. One evening, after a long day at work, a young employee approached him. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." The young man hesitated. Then he asked, "How did you keep going when everything seemed to be falling apart?" The question caught Daniel off guard. For a moment, he was silent. Then he smiled, because suddenly he understood something that had taken years to learn. The hardest season of his life had not only prepared him for a blessing, it had prepared him to help others find theirs. That night, driving home beneath a sky filled with stars, Daniel reflected on his journey. The failed business, the lonely nights, the unanswered prayers, the rejection, the waiting, the fear. If someone had offered to erase all those painful chapters years earlier, he probably would have accepted without hesitation. But now he wasn't so sure. Because every struggle had shaped him. Every setback had taught him something valuable. Every delay had strengthened his faith. Without those difficult seasons, he would never have become the person he was today. And that's when the deepest truth finally settled into his heart. God's purpose is often bigger than our immediate comfort. Sometimes we ask God to remove the storm, but he uses the storm to build strength within us. Sometimes we ask him to change our circumstances, but he chooses to transform our character first. Sometimes we pray for a blessing, while God is preparing us to become a blessing. Daniel thought back to the stranger in the park, the man's words that arrived during one of the darkest days of his life. He never saw that stranger again, yet the message remained. Don't measure God's presence by your current situation, measure it by his promises. Now Daniel truly understood. God had been present during the failures, present during the waiting, present during the silence, present during the uncertainty. Not once had he abandoned him, not once had he forgotten him. And if you're listening right now, maybe this message is meant for you too. Maybe you're facing a challenge that feels impossible. Maybe you're carrying a burden nobody else understands. Maybe you've been praying and waiting and wondering if God still sees you. The answer is yes. He sees every tear. He hears every prayer. He knows every fear hidden inside your heart. And even when you cannot see his hand, you can trust his heart. Because some of God's greatest works happen behind the scenes, in the waiting, in the silence, in the moments when nothing seems to be changing. Never assume that God is absent simply because he is quiet. The seed grows underground long before anyone sees the flower. The sunrise begins before the first ray of light reaches the horizon, and God's plan is often unfolding long before you recognize it. So hold on, keep believing, keep moving forward one step at a time. Your current chapter is not the entire story. The struggle you're facing today may become the testimony that inspires someone tomorrow. The pain you're carrying today may become the source of strength you'll need later. And the prayer that seems unanswered today may already be moving toward its perfect answer. Thank you for spending this time with God Message Global. If this message touched your heart, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who may need encouragement today. And before you leave, remember this: God has not forgotten you. He is still working, he is still guiding, and your story is still being written. Stay faithful, stay hopeful, and trust that the best chapters may still be ahead.